So Lori and I had the privilege of spending 3 weeks in Israel, visiting with grandchildren, great-grandchildren, children too, because they're there when you visit the grandchildren. The kids are there, so you visit with them as well. It's not why you really go. You go to see the grandchildren or great-grandchildren, but it was a wonderful, wonderful trip. Want to give you some impressions in terms of where Israel is at, and they're impressions that you get from traveling, because we did a lot of traveling, because we have kids in Zichron Yaakov, kids in Katzrin, kids in Pardes Chana, and we had one of Dahlia's kids studying in Jerusalem for the year in the gap year program. So we were traveling all around Israel and spent a number of days in Jerusalem, a number of days in the Golan Heights, and Zichron Yaakov and Pardes Chana, which is about 20 minutes south of Zichron and about 35 minutes north of Tel Aviv. So the first impressions when you when you arrive there, and the airport is empty. Not totally empty, because El Al is everywhere, because every single plane that's arriving or leaving is El Al, right? So you notice that it's not at all crowded, but right where El Al is, it's packed. The rest is completely empty. And then when you get to the passports, to go through, again, the line is very, very short. And normally when you get there, you have to split off between those who have foreign passports and those who have Israeli passports. And normally the ones having foreign passports, that's the big lines. And the Israelis is a short line. It's hafuch now, it's completely opposite. The ones going through an Israeli passport way outnumber the ones who have foreign passports. So you realize that tourism is dead, right? There is very little tourism now, that's very obvious. And you also realize that Israelis are flying back and forth like crazy to Europe, to America, for every reason that they normally do, business, family, whatever it might be. Then you get into the cities, and life seems to be normal. Right? The kids are back in school. You may not realize it, but in many parts of the country, the schools were closed for weeks at a time. Sometimes in the Golan Heights, for over a month, they were closed. But the kids are back in school, and the chugim are the extracurricular activities, which is a big deal here, but it's really a big deal in Israel. And they had been canceled because it meant groups of kids gathering together in one spot, right? So they were canceled along with the schools. The chugim were back. All the kids are out there doing the stuff that they do. Another thing that had been canceled, tiyulim, trips. Israelis, much more than Americans, their school system involves going out into Israel and experiencing it. So it's hands-on type of learning. So if you're learning about something in Israel history, you can go to the place that it happened. They had been canceled. There weren't tiyulim because you had to put them on buses. And what do you do if there's a siren in the middle of the highway when you've got a bus with 50 kids on it? It's not manageable. The tiyulim are back. All our grandkids were doing tiyulim on a constant basis, wonderful tiyulim, and quite extensive. In other words, they were willing to go out now into far-flung areas. So that seemed normal. Construction everywhere. They are building like crazy. So on the surface, you have a sense of normalcy. But there are undertones of concern and apprehension. So I said kids go out, right? They go out to chugim, they go out to a friend. They go on a tiyul. But they need to be aware of what to do if the siren does go off. We were driving back on a weekday evening from Tel Aviv after having seen a very powerful performance in Tel Aviv at the Habima Theater, one of the oldest theaters in Israel. And we heard a siren in the distance. The siren clearly wasn't for us, but you find everyone, and you're really not supposed to be on your phones, and not only you can't text, you're not even supposed to be on your phone when you're in a car. Everybody's on their phone calling relatives around the country to find out, is the siren in your area? What do you need to do? What's happening? Turns out it was not necessary because it was a Houthi missile that had been taken out already before it even reached the country. But until you take the missile out, you have to hit the siren in case you don't successfully, or you blow it up inside the land of Israel, and then you have to worry about shrapnel falling down. So every kid knows, my grandchildren told us about, they went to visit a friend because they were having a party, and they heard a siren, they knew exactly where to run to. So imagine that. This is how kids, 8, 9, 10 years old, 6 years old, 13 years old, everywhere they go, there's a thought in the back of their mind, where do I go if there is a siren? So they're going, they're partying, but that's not normal. That's not how children should be thinking about what they need to do. Israelis are going to shows. The show is packed. They're filling the restaurants. So if you have a local restaurant and you're dependent on local traffic, it's good. People are going out. Why? Because they couldn't go out for so long. And they need relief. They need to express themselves socially, to get together, to have some fun, to enjoy a meal together. So they're filling the restaurants. If you're a restaurant in a tourist area, you're in big trouble. Because the only tourists that are there are volunteers. And there are many, many, many volunteers there, thousands of volunteers, and that's where some of the hotels manage to fill up some rooms, and some of the restaurants get some people. But it's not in any way comparable to the normal type of tourism that you would see. We were there Hanukkah and Christmas. Can you imagine what the tourism should be like on Christmas? So where would you go on Christmas if you're coming as a Christian to experience Christmas, right? You would go to Bethlehem, right? Because that's the birthplace. All Christmas celebrations were canceled by the Palestinian Authority. They do not allow Christians to celebrate in public anymore. Did you read about that in the New York Times? Did you hear about that in the Washington Post? Did you hear about that on the news? Christians forbidden to celebrate Christmas in public in Bethlehem. How many knew about it? Okay. How do we not know these things in America? Because they don't cover them, because they look too bad for the Palestinian Authority. So what if you're a Christian? What are you going to spend thousands of dollars to come to Israel and they don't let you celebrate? In Jerusalem, you can celebrate publicly, and there were public celebrations. Why? Because Jerusalem is controlled by the Israelis, not by the Palestinian Authority. So there weren't a lot of Christians there. There were some. There were busloads that were touring, but not a lot. Let me talk about the volunteers. Literally thousands upon thousands. Lori and I were in Jerusalem, and we were meeting our granddaughter to participate in her classes. She wanted us to come and be in the classes and see what she was experiencing, and the program welcomed us. But that was in the afternoon, so we were already there in the morning. So we asked our good friends, the Kiefers, where can we volunteer? Indoors, please. It was a little bit cold there. They said, no problem, we got plenty of indoors. And they found a place, and we signed up, and we got there. And the biggest problem was there were too many volunteers. We were getting in each other's way. We had to organize ourselves. It was many Americans and Canadians, right? And Israeli Americans who lived in Jerusalem who volunteer every single day, and they lived there, but a lot from out of town. So we organized ourselves. What were we doing? This is a charity, not a charity, it's a charity. It's a program that packages fruits, vegetables, in a box, puts it onto a kind of like a assembly line, and then they gather it at the end, and they load it into a truck, and they take it out to all places in Israel to distribute this food free to families that needed it. So we had to organize the assembly line, and it was amazing how many boxes we packed. Where does food come from? It's mainly donated, right? Or if it's not donated, it's purchased by money that's donated. Nobody gets paid. There's nobody who works for this organization that gets paid, right? As I said, it was crowded, and all the volunteer groups are crowded, and you can do it. It doesn't have to be hard labor. There's a lot of volunteering you can do in Israel that is really easy. Lori was preparing the plastic cases that held the fruit. You put 4 apples in here and 5 of this here, and there was a nice elderly woman who was packing the oranges, and she was doing a great job. But then the problem is, how do you get the box of packaged oranges to the assembly line? And I saw her try and do it, and that was a bad idea, right? So I stopped, I went over, I picked it up, brought it to the assembly line. I said, I'll be back every 2 minutes, right? I'll work over here, then every 2 minutes I'll come here. It's only 3 or 4 steps away. and I'll take the orange over there because you shouldn't be schlepping that. So that's very encouraging to Israelis to see the thousands upon thousands of volunteers from everywhere, and not all Jewish, obviously. Many, many non-Jews volunteering. There is tremendous relief in Israel about the ceasefire from the north, right? Hesitation, but very positive. They have got good vibes about the ceasefire holding, as they expect the upcoming administration to be as or even more supportive of Israel than Biden has. And I'll tell you, if Biden was there, he could be elected prime minister easily. The appreciation for what he did is very, very strong there, and they expect that to continue. So they believe that the ceasefire will hold. But again, hesitancy. You can believe it, but you're still smart. So of the 80,000 refugees, Israeli refugees, that's what they are. They had to leave their homes because they were getting pounded every day. Not many have returned yet. They want to see what happens after the 60 days is up and see if the ceasefire is actually going to hold. The major question that anytime I got to speak to someone who was there, that they don't understand, I would call it dismay. What is it? They don't understand how America and the West still leave Iran virtually untouched, in spite of the missiles flying not only into Israel, but into Western assets, into our own ships, into boats that are taking products all over the world. They could be UK, they could be France, they could be any country, and even at our soldiers from missiles from the Houthis. Everyone knows that no missile gets shot by the Houthis unless Iran says to shoot. They paid for the missile, they gave them the missile, and their advisors are there telling them how to do it and what to do. So it's Iran shooting missiles, and Israelis are absolutely just staring and saying, how is it possible that the West and the United States of America allows Iran to shoot missiles and they don't respond? So that's something that they still don't grasp, and many of us don't grasp it as well. Some expect enormous pressure on Iran, maybe even strikes against their nuclear facilities. Others are less optimistic about it. It's kind of up in the air. That's what they're hoping will be the next step, but they have no assuredness that that's going to happen. The thing that is pervasive is concern about the hostages for very obvious reasons. That's the most critical issue now. Can they get the hostages, those who are still alive, and they figure it's probably less than 50 at this point. Can they get them out, and can they retrieve the remains of those who've died in captivity? It hangs over everything and everyone. So we went for a stroll on the Midrachov, kind of like an area where there's only no cars, like Lincoln Mall, right, on Miami Beach. You walk along the Midrachov and there's no cars and there's stores. And even though it's Shabbat afternoon, it's a mixed city, Zichron Yaakov, secular, religious. So some of the restaurants are open and there's some music playing and people are out there enjoying themselves. But what do you see? Chairs, and every chair has a picture of one of the hostages. We went to the show in Tel Aviv, lined with pictures of the hostages. There's nowhere you can go. You walk into a restaurant, in the window, pictures of the hostages. This is something that hangs over them every day, every hour, every minute. There's no agreement on how to get them out. There's a divided country on what the government should do to get them out. No agreement whatsoever. It's kind of like, I was thinking the other day when we heard that we're going to trade some of the perpetrators of 9/11 who have been in Guantanamo, right, for how many decades. We were going to trade them for some American hostages, right? And some Americans said, okay, let's get them home to their families. Doesn't matter that, we'll trade them. They did a horrible thing. They were a part of 9/11, but it's a long time ago. Let's get our hostages back. And other Americans said, that's absurd. How dare you let these criminals go? Look what they did to us. We're divided on that. So why should Israel not be divided on this? People look and say, Israel's divided. What country wouldn't be divided on an issue like this? They're debating it. They're arguing it. They'll be voting on it one day when they have an election to hold people accountable. and they'll vote according to their own conscience. But yes, they're divided, but any country would be divided on such a difficult... Jimmy Carter just passed away, right? That issue of the hostages destroyed his presidency, right? And we were divided as a country what to do about the hostages. There was no agreement. So we can't expect Israel to be some unique country. And it's filled with Jews. You expect Jews to agree? It's even more so in Israel than it is in other countries. So the division is very serious on the hostages. Another impression. We went to pick up Amit, that's Dalia's eldest daughter, who was coming to Zichron to spend Shabbat from Jerusalem, and she took the train. So I'm not letting her take a bus from the train to us. I'm picking her up at the train station. So I get there a few minutes early, and they let everybody arrives, gets off the train. Whenever you're there in Israel, there's always a few soldiers coming home for Shabbat, right? Yeah, a few here, 3 here, 4 there. This was dozens and dozens and dozens of soldiers leaving the train with their full regalia. The backpack that, it could break your back, it's so heavy. The weapon, the uniform, all getting a break for Shabbat. And you realize all these kids, some of them are supposed to be in the army, but some of them you look and say, wait a second, that's not a kid. That's a 28-year-old. That's a 32, they're reservists. And then you realize how many Israelis who are not standing army, that you expect, the standing army, how many Israelis are still serving in the army, and how that is affecting the families, the communities, the businesses, their own businesses, other people's businesses. They're short on workers. That's what many volunteers do. They go to work. So that was a tremendous impression to see these dozens upon dozens of Israelis. The good news is they were able to go home because things are much quieter in Gaza and things are very quiet in the north. So they're giving them more leave. The bad thing is, what are all these people still doing in the army? How much longer can they be in the army and sustain their families and sustain the country? So everything looks normal, but it's not normal. They seek as much normalcy as they possibly can. There's a sign that's universal, just like the pictures of the hostages, there's a sign that's everywhere. Yachad ninatzeach. Together we will be victorious. And the Yachad is very important, together. So what unifies Israelis is we will win this war. How it's going to be won, what's going to happen in the negotiations, no agreement. But there's one thing they all agree upon. We don't stop until we win. No more ceasefires that leave terrorists in charge on our borders. No more ceasefires that allow them to violate the ceasefire like everyone has always done. There's never been a real ceasefire. The only ceasefire is Israel stops shooting and they cheat. And it's just a question of how much cheating you're going to let them to do. There's a new simple rule in Israel, at least as of now. 0 cheating. You break the ceasefire and we respond immediately. You break the ceasefire and we do not adhere to our part until you adhere to your part. So if you're listening to the news and they're talking about Israel's talking about maybe they're not going to leave southern Lebanon after 60 days. There's one simple reason. The deal is that Hezbollah does not have any position or any presence in southern Lebanon after 60 days. Well, they haven't totally left yet, and the Lebanese army hasn't occupied all the southern Lebanon. And Israel said very simply, that's the deal. You don't adhere to the deal, we're not leaving. You adhere to the deal, then we leave. We don't leave and hope you adhere to the deal. That's the new thing in Israel. 0 trust, 0 tolerance for breaking of ceasefire agreements. And that the Israelis are unified on. They will adhere to ceasefires or Israel will not retreat. There's no agreement in Israel on what or who will replace Hamas. You do hear about those, and you hear it all the time. Israelis want to reoccupy Gaza. Are there Israelis who want to reoccupy Gaza? Absolutely. The Israelis want to rebuild the second temple and offer sacrifices because the Messiah is coming. All right? They're what we call a fringe. Somebody would say lunatic fringe. They're a fringe element. They're a tiny little group that's very loud that the media loves because it's such a wacko idea. Right, we're going to rebuild the temple and offer sacrifices. We're going to reoccupy Gaza. The world will go berserk if we did that, and Israelis don't want it. They want nothing to do with occupation in Gaza. So that, yes, it exists, but it's fringe. There's no disagreement that any violation of ceasefire will be met with tremendous force, as I said. No more, it's not so bad, not worth the condemnation of the world. That doesn't happen anymore. The disdain for the United Nations, I think it's as pervasive as it is now in our own country. They despise the United Nations. They consider them to be corroborators with terrorists. Why? Because they are corroborators with terrorists. We have full proof that UNIFIL in the north totally cooperated with Hezbollah, and we know that that Hamas receives totally support from the UN in Gaza. So they consider the United Nations to be a terrorist organization, fundamentally. They don't understand, as I said, why the countries in Europe are not dealing with the radical Islamist threat in their own borders, still trying to appease them by being tough on Israel. Appeasement doesn't work, and they're waiting for the Europeans to wake up and finally understand that. As long as America and in Germany, in terms of Europe, because when they talk about Europe, Israelis are talking about Germany, right? Germany is the key ally. It's the richest, most powerful, and most steadfast ally in Europe that Israel has had since the establishment of the state, right? A special relationship between Germany, a special responsibility that Germany feels. So England goes this way, England goes that way, France always goes that, retreat, whatever it is, France just retreats. That's the only direction they understand, right? They expect that, back and forth. But in Germany, they rely upon steadfast support. So as long as they have Germany, they feel they have Europe. As long as they have America, they have the world's real superpower. And then they feel secure and strong. So the hope is there. They're careful. You do read about a large number of Israelis left Israel, right? A record number. But I'm not sure in the same article they told you about the large number of people who made Aliyah, right? That should have been in the article too. And what they didn't tell you is that significant numbers of Israelis who left only left temporarily. They're already on the way back. Remember I said the airport was filled with Israelis flying back to Israel? So the numbers are evening out between the numbers of Israelis who left, the numbers of Israelis who returned, the people make Aliyah, and in the future, the people who will return to Israel. So it's a moment of transition. There's a great deal of hope, relief, but at the same time, the concern and the nerves are on edge. And we can only hope that the ceasefires hold and that peace begins to prevail. And the most important thing is that the moderate Arab states step up and take over Gaza and do not allow the terrorists to rise again. That's not an easy thing to accomplish, but that's the hope that the Israelis feel and express when you speak with them. So it's a new year. Let's hope for a year in which the wars come to an end, not only in Israel, but in Ukraine, because the suffering there is horrendous. The death toll is insulting to humanity. The 21st century, we're 2024, and you see what's happening to young people in Russia and Ukraine. The death toll from there, Ukraine is defending itself. There's no one to blame there. But Russia, it's unimaginable that this could happen in the 21st century. Just unimaginable. So we pray for the end of that conflict and certainly the end of the conflict in the Mideast. And there's great hope that the next peace will be a lasting peace because it will not include any terrorist in charge of Gaza or any terrorist in charge of southern Lebanon, and the neutralization of Iran as a military threat to the Middle East. Kain Yiratzon, may this be God's will, and we all say Amen.